Welcome back. Bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about the books that I got to in the month of April. So, without any further ado, let's drop straight into some monthly statistics, shall we? Oh my gosh. So, as I was saying before Katya so rudely interrupted, let's do our monthly statistics. So in the month of April, I read 8 books, which totaled 4,271 pages, and I listened to 37 and a half hours on audiobook, and my average rating for the month was just above 4 stars, 4.09 stars. I only started 1 new series, and 4 of these books I would consider either written by or featuring characters that are not like me, which is great. Like, that's half, so love that for me. And all of these books were novels in the adult fantasy age range. I think maybe 2 of them are more sci-fi, but they were all SFF. And that will do it for the stats. So now let's just jump into the books themselves, shall we? So as usual, this will be going in ascending star order, and my star ratings are just based on my personal enjoyment of the book. I'm not over here trying to critique like the writing or blah blah. It's just, did I have fun? Why or why not? So the first book that I'll talk about, which was my least favorite book that I read this month, was the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, or Secret Project Number 2 by Brandon Sanderson. I think I originally gave this 3.5 stars after immediately finishing it, but the more I've thought about it, the lower and lower it goes. So I think it's really probably 3 stars exactly. It is very aggressively middle of the road for me personally. And I think part of that is just the nature of these secret projects, because I didn't know anything going in, and that's kind of on me because there was information available. I just chose to not look at any of it. And if I had known that it was going to be this kind of like Total Recall-esque, like sci-fi, like Sanderson take on Hitchhiker Guide of the Galaxy, I don't know that I probably still would have read it because I backed the secret projects, but that's just not my trope salad that I want to be all up in. So it was never really going to be the story for me, and it wasn't unique enough on its own to stand out from other stories like this. And if I'm going to consume a story like this, I think I would prefer for it to be like in movie form over book form. But that's just me personally. I don't really care about this dude who wakes up, has no idea who he is, and trying to find out who he is, and then it progresses from there, very a la Total Recall and like that kind of stuff. So it just was not for me. And then like the main theming around it, I get, like it was trying to really push the idea of, if you get trapped in this mental cycle of feeling like you are less than, then it kind of becomes this like self-perpetuating cycle, which I appreciate. But the way that it was done in this book felt like, oh, poor kind of more average, hetero, cisgendered white dude who's been kind of average his whole life now gets to be the star of the story. And I'm just like, I feel like there's so many stories out there like that already that I don't know that I needed this one. And that's not to say that if you felt seen or anything like that, that I think that you don't deserve to be seen. You definitely do. But there's a lot of stories out there that represent you and this kind of thing. So before I dig myself any deeper, I'll just move right along. And the next book that I'll talk about is Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erikson. This is book 2 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I gave this one 3.75 stars, which I think is the same rating that I gave to Gardens of the Moon. And I will say, I think I liked Gardens of the Moon more because it felt like a grittier take on like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of adventure story, which is much more my cup of tea than Deadhouse Gates, which is a much more thematic look, trying to really just put you in the middle and shove it in your face, kind of the horrors of war. And I don't know, like that just didn't personally resonate with me. This kind of stuck kind of par for the course with Erikson and his characters for me. I know a lot of people always scream from the rooftops about how amazing Erikson's characters are. However, for me, I think because we only really meet them where they're at now, and we very rarely get any kind of information about their backstory, at least in these first 2 books. Maybe that changes as the series goes on. I obviously don't know. But from my perspective, after just reading the first 2 books, it seems like we don't get that much character backstory. I don't really know why these characters are the way they are, or why they're doing what they're doing. Like, I'm never really given that kind of in their head look at why, who, what, where, when, why. You know what I mean? And so because of that, I think that there is this impetus on the reader that I'm supposed to provide a lot of the context for these characters and hopefully see my friends, family, or myself in their struggles. And I think that that is when the characters really speak to people. Because I know like a lot of people talk about, there's this one character, Felicen, who is a teenager who has gone through very traumatic stuff. She has basically been selling her body to keep herself and her friends alive in this kind of prison situation that she's in. And if you're somebody who has survived that type of violence, then I could see you maybe connecting with this character more. But the way that she was processing her trauma felt, I'm trying to be very careful because I obviously don't want to like offend anybody, because I get that this is like a very touchy subject, but it felt more one note to me than I would have kind of expected, because she processed her trauma by just being kind of this guarded brat to everybody at all times, and we really never got to see behind that wall for me to have that kind of empathy and connection with her as a character. I don't know. But anyways, so there was that, and then like there was this major plot line where we're kind of following people as they're fleeing during this kind of bloody war revolution, and we get these really like quick flickers of like really grotesque, violent things that are just described in like a sentence or two. And I think that that is meant to be kind of disorienting and kind of to like put you off of like, oh my god, that's horrifying. But because like we're not in the characters' heads, I don't get to see them ever really process in the way that would like click for the way that my brain works. And so just like it was like, okay, just it felt nigh trauma porn, if you will. And so I don't know. And then there is, I don't want to spoil anything, there is a scene later on that people tend to love, but again, it didn't hit emotionally for me because I don't know this character. I haven't been following this character or their struggles, who they are, what they are. I'm just supposed to connect with what they're doing, which I kind of did, but it just doesn't push it all the way over the edge. But leaving cons behind, what I did like about Deadhouse Gates is we got a lot more looking at the Azath? I don't know, whatever, however you say that. And I thought that that was really cool, and I really particularly enjoyed learning more about the character Ikariam, and his dynamic with Mappa was really interesting. I know a lot of people like are like, oh, their friendship is so great, but I'm kind of like, I would hope that my friend would be more forthcoming with me and not necessarily hiding all of that, but whatever. But I really thought that that was the most intriguing part to me, was all the stuff that featured Ikariam and Mappo. But I think I'll leave it at that because I really don't know that I want to do a full spoiler thing. I don't know. If I'm ever part of a live show, I do have more thoughts and very spoiler-filled thoughts, but this is just not the forum for that. And we'll just keep moseying along. So the next thing that I'll talk about is the jar pick for April, and that was Empire of Exiles, book 1 in the Books of the Usurper by Erin M. Evans. I have read Erin M. Evans before because she used to write books in the Forgotten Realms world, which is obviously my bread and butter. And so I was excited to get a story from her in her own world, and it was kind of featuring this murder mystery, and I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I was a little bored for the first half of the book or so, but then once we started kicking into the gear of getting some revelations and starting to understand what had happened with this murder mystery, I really started to get more and more sucked into it. So I would say if you are looking for a like super fleshed out world, that's not really the point of Empire of Exiles. I think she has some really cool ideas and some cool world building ideas, especially with her magic. It's kind of it's not a super flashy magic system. It's more this kind of thing where different people can have different affinities with different kinds of substances, and the substances almost like call to them, and it's almost connected to this like celestial component where at certain times of the year or whatever they will be in alignment, and that makes them almost go out of control if they're near their substance. So there's people that are like able to interface with bone or ink or metals or whatever. And so usually what they do is they can kind of like read the history of an item and kind of do that kind of thing, and like what percentage of copper and zinc is in this whatever. But when they go into alignment, they kind of lose control and almost try to cover themselves in their substance, and if they do manage to completely cover themselves, they'll die. So there's kind of this interesting twist on this magic system, and there were some cool reveals with where the mystery plot went, and I'll definitely be checking out book 2, but just know that it will be a little bit slower burn in the first 50%, and then I personally thought it kicked into gear, but it's not like a new favorite or anything like that. Then the next thing I'll talk about is Smolder by Laurell K. Hamilton. This is book 29 in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series. And this one was kind of a mixed bag for me. I also gave it 4 stars, and I do have just so much nostalgia, and I just love being with these characters. But there was this kind of interesting murder mystery kind of revealed at the beginning of Smolder that we didn't have any resolution to in this book, so it almost felt like an incomplete book. And I do know that there is book 30 coming out this fall, because this is the 30-year anniversary of Anita. And so I'm almost like, did she have a longer book that she split into 2? Because like that whole plot line kind of went nowhere. It just was really kind of refreshing character dynamics on page with different characters that we haven't seen in a while. And I will say that the character dynamics felt a little bit like Miss Hamilton was a little bit on her high horse about kind of how people talk after being in therapy for a long time. There was a lot of like, I acknowledge your feelings and like that kind of stuff, which I do appreciate being in a book, because we so rarely see people trying to have that type of communication with their partners. And I do appreciate that there is this kind of unwieldy polycule at the center of this, and so there's a lot of feelings, a lot of dynamics that are at play. So I do really appreciate that, but it started to feel like every conversation was like a mini therapy session, which just in the beginning I was into, and then after like, I don't know, it was like almost 500 pages, this book. So after a while I was just like, okay, I get it. Can we get back to like the mystery plot? And there is a new big bad being introduced, which I'm really excited to see kind of where this new meta arc goes. And so obviously I'll be continuing on with my faves, but this one was a good entry, but not a great entry in the Anita Blake world. Then the next thing I'll talk about is my first 4.25 star, and that was In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. It might actually be more like a 4.5. I don't know. I really, really liked In the Lives of Puppets. So it's kind of billed as a sci-fi reimagining of Pinocchio, which I understand there are glimpses. There's like a whale-ish thing. There's a blue fairy thing. There's the fox and the cat. There's like these hallmarks of the Pinocchio story there. But this felt much more like if we took some of the things that we associate with Pinocchio and had almost like a Wall-E-esque story. It was just really wholesome and sweet. There was this like crazy nurse robot called Nurse Ratched who had to like engage her empathy protocols, otherwise she would just talk about like drilling into your skull and stuff. And so there was her, there was this little like overexcited like vacuum cleaner robot called Rambo who just always wanted to vacuum and clean things and just like was so happy when he got to clean things. And so it is just that kind of hallmark TJ Klune wholesome sweet story with this kind of macabre / darker humor thrown into the mix that just worked for me. So I think it was a lot of fun, and if that sounds good to you at all, I would say really check it out. There is like a kind of asexual male android romance, if you will, kind of center stage in this story. And so it was just sweet and wholesome and nice, and I just had a lot of fun with it. Then the next 2 things I'll kind of talk about as one. So I read books 2 and 3 in the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy. So I read Dragons of Winter Night and Dragons of Spring Dawning to finally catch up with the read-along that I was supposed to be doing with Kris from A Fictional Escapist. But I caught up because we were supposed to finish in April, and I finished in April. So gold star for me. I think I like book 3 more than I like book 2. And this is just classic fantasy, kind of at its finest, because I also think that it does this unique thing. So the Dragonlance Chronicles follows this... Now Jujubee is screaming. 1 second. Okay, I've gone and pet everybody. So, the Dragonlance Chronicles is the original trilogy in the Dragonlance world, which is very Dungeons & Dragons inspired. It was a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting in much the same way that Forgotten Realms was. But I think it has a really unique thing because we follow this older group of characters that before we meet them were friends, adventuring, then they kind of went off on their own thing, and then they had this date that they were all supposed to meet back at this inn in their hometown to kind of catch up and talk about where they've been and all of that kind of stuff. And then things ensue from there because this mysterious woman shows up with a blue crystal staff, and they kind of get launched into this adventure that ends up pitting them against the Stark Queen, and just so good. I just think that it has enough information about the characters that you really become connected to them, and it's just very fast-paced, almost episodic feeling adventure fantasy, where we are doing a overarching quest, but there are definitely like smaller things that happen along the way, and it's just so much fun. I love the character dynamics. There's this one character in particular, Raceland, who is the mage of the group, who is such a brooding, messy, mean to his brother Nightmare, but I just love him, and I know that it's wrong, but I still love him anyways. And then the final thing that I'll talk about, which was my favorite book of the month, was A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This is the prequel, standalone prequel, to the Priory of the Orange Tree, and I think that this was actually a little bit better in terms of the pacing and the characters than Priory of the Orange Tree was for me personally. I had a lot of fun with this, and I kept wondering, where are we gonna go? Because if you don't know, the Priory of the Orange Tree, basically, we are following two different sides of this world. In the western continent / countries, there is this ruling line known as the Brethnet line that is kind of, if there isn't a ruler of the Brethnet line on the throne, then this evil kind of apocalyptic dragon known as the, is it the Fallen One? I don't know, whatever. There's this evil apocalyptic dragon that will rise up if there is not a Brethnet on the throne. And there's a whole lot of information that we get about that along the way. And then in the East, there is a kind of counterculture to that, where there are these other kinds of dragons that are more Eastern, kind of Asian style of dragon. And they live kind of in a symbiosis, and they kind of worship and revere these dragons and train to be dragon riders. And so there's kind of these political dynamics between the two things. And then dragons are starting to wake back up. The evil ones that are more like a European style dragon with the 4 feet and the wings and all of that kind of stuff. And so there's just a lot of political stuff going on, trying to get these very disparate cultures and countries to come together against this larger threat. And that's very Priory. And then A Day of Fallen Night happens 500 years before the events in Priory, and you get to see some characters. I don't want to spoil anything. There's some characters that we know in Priory that are here in Day, and it was just a lot of fun. So if you like kind of sprawling political fantasy with tons of dragons everywhere and kind of intrigue about why, what is happening, why are these dragons, how are we going to get people to come together to face these dragons? And unlike in Priory, where we mainly get perspectives in the East and West and a little bit in the South where the Priory is, which is this kind of hidden organization protecting this orange tree that gives them magical powers, in Day of Fallen Night, we get perspectives again in the East and West, but also in the South and North. So you really get to kind of expand this world. And it just makes me really excited to see what Samantha Shannon's going to do next, because I think she said that she's trying to make this a series of standalones, and she has ideas for at least 2 more, but only one of them is currently like contracted. But one of the ones that she wants to do eventually is go back and tell the original story, and I'm so into it. This is such a cool world. And if you don't know, Priory is actually like a retelling of, I think it's St. George and the Dragon, which if you listen to the interviews with Samantha Shannon, she talks about how that is a notoriously like sexist tale. And so this was her like feminist reimagining of that. And so once you have that kind of framework, you do start to see a lot of this kind of metaphorical language used in just really cool ways that she's trying to imbue this story with things womanly. I don't really know how to put it, but if you read the books, I think you'll know what I mean. And it just has cool magic, lots of dragons, political intrigue. They are chonky. The stories do stand alone enough that you could read them really in any order, and I don't think that you'd be spoiled for one or the other, because it's really about these character dynamics and the political landscape and that kind of stuff, more so than the kind of reveals themselves, but there are cool reveals. So yeah, I don't know, like if you have been hesitant about Priory and you're really procrastinating on it because you don't know if it's for you, then I would say try Priory, and if it's not working, try Day still, because I think Day is a little bit better, but they're both great. And I think that will do it for me kind of gushing about Day of Fallen Night. Please let me know in the comments down below, what was your favorite read from the month of April? I'd love to know. Or have you read any of these books and you want to disagree with me or have a conversation in the comments down below? I would love to talk to you about Deadhouse Gates or whatever. And if you want to talk spoilers, just make sure you say spoilers and put a bunch of spaces so that people can't get spoiled just by flipping through the comments. But I'd love to have those discussions. And if you just want to leave an emoji, let's leave dragons or something sun related or night related. Any of those three. I leave it up to you for Day of Fallen Night, who is the champion of the month. And I think that will do it for this week's video. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!